Yes, it's me again about to blank all over your blah 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 people. We've already seen people using multi-frequency scanning or multi-frequency type technology. Um, there was a whole thing about polarized light and salt crystal something, and we ended up with a rainbow and whatever. Well, the idea of multiple frequencies is that each one of them has a different in their size. So by overlapping all of these different frequencies or sending them one after the other, you end up with a multispectrum scan that allows you to completely bypass
that region and observe the scattered photon.
Yeah, all that nonsense he's trying to say is impossible. I'm sorry, bro. You're not in the future. I am. When is this video? Days ago. Oh, fuck's sakes. You are so out of date. What is wrong with you, bro? I insult you, sir. Spectrum scanning is decades old technology. He's talking from days ago. I'm talking from 10 years ago. Wow. Let's get into this.
But as we saw earlier, if we use light of wavelength lambda, the best positional accuracy that we can achieve is limited by that wavelength. So
Duh.
delta x is of the same order of magnitude as lambda. And if we want to improve the precision, we must use shorter wavelength light, which means photons with higher momentum, since a photon's momentum is given by h divided by lambda. It then follows that the photon momentum required to probe a region of size delta x is...
Last time I checked, light worked at the speed of light, and therefore the frequency is not a variant of its speed, but it's a variant of some other part of its excitedness. Go on.
Of order h divided by delta x. Now, when such a photon scatters off the electron, it transfers momentum to it, disturbing its motion. And so the uncertainty in the electron's momentum is of the same order as the photon's momentum, which in turn is equal to h divided by delta x. And if we then rearrange this expression, we find that delta x times delta p is roughly equal to h, highlighting the trade-off between...
These are circular arguments that I don't like, because we talk about the idea of, well, if you use a photon to look at an electron, whatever, something, then you're going to displace it, and so you can't know what happened because you moved it around. But by moving it around, you still end up visualizing it. You haven't stopped anything.
In how precisely we can localize the electron and how well we can know its momentum.
I don't need to know any of that. And ipso facto, if you know all of the different stuff that the photon is doing, then you know how far it dissipated it, and then you can regurgitate out of your brain or your computer whatever it is that it would have been if you actually had looked at it blind without an assistance. You realize that it is capable. You can just, if you know the variable and you know the displacement factor, it's like saying I know how far I push this box. Where was the box in the first place? Given a certain amount of time and a certain amount of push force per time, you can rewind the clock in your simulation and say it was here based off of where it ended up, based on the amount of push and the time scale of when I started. All of this stuff means to say that you can calculate to figure out what reality was, even if you distort it as you're looking at it.
And you may recognize this relation. It's none other than Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. Now, so far, everything here follows directly from ordinary quantum mechanics. But let's now include one additional effect, the influence of gravity. According to Einstein's general theory of relativity, all energy curves spacetime, even the energy carried by a photon,
I disagree. Move on.
E equals hf. To make this clear, we can work out the mass equivalent of a photon's energy using Einstein's famous relation E equals mc squared.
I can figure out the mass equivalent of a photon's energy by finding out how a solar sail works, and then doing some math. Beep, bop, boop, done. Do you need other stuff? Could you do it with this type of experimental? Yeah, you should. You could.
If we rearrange for mass, we can define an effective mass as being equal to the energy divided by the speed of light squared. And if we then sub in the expression for the photon energy, we end up with an effective mass written as hf divided by c squared.
Noticing
Now,
that
here
light
is the
doesn't
key
change
point.
its speed.
As the photon approaches the electron, this effective mass produces a tiny gravitational field pulling on the electron. Now, if the characteristic distance over which the interaction occurs is r, then in simple Newtonian terms, we can estimate the gravitational acceleration of the electron due to this gravitational attraction, and it takes the familiar form, gm divided by r squared. And then if we sub in the expression we have for the effective mass and simplify, we end up with the result GHF divided by c squared r squared. This is essentially saying that a higher frequency and therefore higher energy photon will pull more on the electron, causing a greater acceleration.
Right.
This month, Nutrifarms is welcoming you to the table.
Causing a greater acceleration. Now, roughly speaking, the gravitational interaction...
In other words, knowing exactly what we've done to the electron, we can then fire multiple photons with different energy levels to compensate or adjust the electron as we're doing it, so we don't end up actually changing anything. We can, cancel it out, maybe probe it from both sides, question mark. Hey.
Lasts for the time it takes light to cross this region, which is simply r divided by c. And we can then actually calculate how much the photon's gravitational pull displaces the electron during this tiny amount of time. We simply use SUVAT, which you were likely taught in school, in which case we can write the displacement as being roughly equal to at squared. And then if we sub in the expression we derive for a and t, and after simplifying, we find the electron's displacement is given by GHF divided by c to the 4. And so we see that the gravitational influence of the probing photon introduces an additional uncertainty in the electron's position. And we can express this in terms of the photon's momentum by remembering that a photon's energy is equal to its momentum multiplied by the...
Can we please go back to the original prompt, which was, can you even look at it in the first place? I don't care where it is, where it was going. I just want to look at it. So, can you or not? The answer is, let's talk about something irrelevant to the question. Thanks.
Speed of light. And if we sub this into our displacement equation, we find that delta x can be written as gp divided by c cubed. Finally, if you recall, the photon's momentum is of the same order of magnitude as the uncertainty in the electron's momentum, and so we can rewrite the electron displacement in terms of the momentum uncertainty. And there we have it. This represents a new source of gravitationally induced uncertainty. And so we can now combine this with the ordinary run-of-the-mill quantum mechanical uncertainty relation that we love and know so well. And when we do, we end up with a modified version of the uncertainty principle, one that goes by the name of the generalized uncertainty principle. Now, to get a sense of what this is telling us, let's plot this function and visualize what's going on.
Sure.
Okay, so if we plot delta p on the x-axis and delta x on the y-axis, then we see that the green curve represents the first term and shows how reducing the position uncertainty increases the momentum uncertainty. The red line shows the new gravitational term, whereby increasing the momentum uncertainty increases the positional uncertainty.
You realize that when you throw an electron from an electron gun, you know with extreme certainty where it's going to end up, depending on the properties of what it goes through the air. So if you track its motion and the end positions, you can then simulate where it would have gone awry and how that would have ended up, and all those simulations of all the different electrons would allow you to then visualize everything, including the area of the double slit and what it's made of itself and the electrons orbiting it, because you would know their influence of it as it's passing through. But I'm sorry, what?
And then finally, the blue line shows the combined effect. And we clearly see that there exists a minimum possible uncertainty. The effect of the new term is to halt the decrease in delta x as delta p increases, and then actually cause it to rise. To find the minimum delta x, we need to find where the gradient of our function is 0. And so if we differentiate the position uncertainty with respect to delta p, we find the following expression, and then we can set this equal to 0. If we then rearrange slightly, we find that at the minimum, delta p squared is equal to hc cubed divided by g. And then taking the square root, we find that delta...
Basically, my assumption is that if you have rotating frequency, which is easily to be done with a polarizing filter, you can make a light spectrum augment that will generally just cycle through the variance of all types of light, and it doesn't matter where you aim this beam at, you'll end up with the resulting adjustments on any of those positions on the sensor side be able to be resolved to the difference between frequencies, which can be so minute that you can go far beyond electrons. And also we want to work on scales that, like a small time scale, as I mentioned. So the faster we go about these bursts of energy, the less likely we're going to make a black hole, as you mentioned earlier in your video. As I said, to be clear, high cycling frequency, we can get a high resolution with no high density at any given position. So basically, all the different variants of light passing through a given area, no individual position has a high density of that light, because as soon as one photon of certain frequency passes through, a photon of a different frequency passes through, and no two need to pass through at the same time. And so we can do a burst and a string of multiple frequency light and end up with the fidelity that can give you Planck length, even possibly even smaller, depending on the differences between frequencies. Because literally, if you have, say, a frequency that is, like, just imagine you have, where's the notes document thing? Okay, imagine you have a frequency swivel like this, and you have another one like this. The difference between those two frequencies could be such that when you notice that any bump or any difference in how those frequencies present, when you actually look at them, you can resolve images that are down to like I want to say angstrom, but I don't really give a shit for saying any actual words that matter. But the point is, the other thing is you're talking about you can make a black hole out of just probing the Planck length using an immense amount of energy. And it's like, well, yeah, if you actually dump a lot of energy all simultaneously into any amount of points, you're not just making a black hole that will show up at the point that you're looking at, but everywhere between, like the formation of the beam itself at that. So, in order to really get this kind of fidelity, again, the thing that you could do is have a specific convergence position that would allow you to have that all of the different bits of light are focused towards one specific point, like we see in that weird reactor that's supposed to blow up little fuel pellets. And that was cute, and it was stupid, but it proved that you can make little explosions. We didn't make a black hole then, and that was a lot of lasers pointed at one spot. So I'm kind of thinking that that's evidence against the black hole theory because, like, yeah, you can collapse some stuff, but we're not making black holes. So if you go higher, and again, if you go at different frequencies of light, for the sake of visualizing it, once you get it on the other side and use your sensors, all the different sensors grabbing all those different bits of information to the degree of, look, I saw a person make a camera out of a single photon collector, and he siphoned it through an oscilloscope, and it was 2 billion frames per second. And he's not achieving black holes because it's way simple. But yeah, I don't know. I think you're too focused on, like, if you focus on Schwarzschild radius and stuff and black holes, it's a fair assessment to say that if you make a tiny black hole, that first of all, the size of a tiny black hole and for the infinitesimal amount of time and energy that you put into it, in other words, a microdose of burst energy, you're going to make maybe a black hole, but it won't last long because not a lot of energy is in it. So yeah, if you run it for like, I don't know, an hour, you're going to have a problem. If you run it for like 1 second or a femtosecond, you're not going to make a black hole. The time scales are too small. The amount of energy imparted to a single focused area of space is too small that it's not able to make a black hole. And even if it could, I mean, good job. You made a black hole. Use that to make some weird gravitational anomalies. Like, you could just use an energy beam and then make black holes to make gravitational forces that can make hovering cars. It's not the best idea, but it's possible.
In the square root, we find that delta P is roughly equal to the square root of hc cubed divided by g. The last step is to then sub this expression for delta P back into the generalized uncertainty relation. And if we do this, we find the minimum achievable positional uncertainty. And hopefully, if you've made it this far, you are as amazed as I am, because this is precisely the Planck scale that we encountered earlier. And so, from this entirely different starting point, we arrive at exactly the same conclusion. Nature sets an ultimate limit to how finely space can be resolved.
The last thing you want is to be in a situation where someone asks you, when was the last time you got an STI test? And
I don't care.
Space can be resolved.
Hey.
From two
size of your
different
dick is small.
one involving black hole collapse,
You
the
can't even
under-rooted in
find it
quantum
on the
measurement and the
spectrum.
generalized
It's too
uncertainty
small.
principle, we reach the same conclusion.
Not you.
There exists a smallest meaningful length in nature, the Planck length. Below this scale, the very concept of distance, and with it the classical notion of space-time, ceases to have operational meaning. So where does that leave us? Well, we appear to have reached an operational boundary. To see
Yeah.
smaller, we must use higher energy, but near the Planck scale, the attempt backfires. General relativity predicts collapse into a black hole, while the generalized uncertainty principle shows that delta X stops shrinking and starts to grow.
Not if you're flicking your machine on with the accuracy of a little tiny bolt of energy, and then you read that information so that you're only probing for like 10 to the minus 20 seconds. You're never going to make a black hole, but you'll be able to see everything. Everything. Anywhere.
It's not that quantum mechanics or relativity are wrong, it's that at Planckian scales, quantum effects and gravity have to be treated together. Any viable theory must put them on equal footing. One such idea is string theory. It suggests that the fundamental building blocks are tiny one-dimensional strings with a finite size, of the same order as the Planck length. That finite size changes the rules. Pushing to higher energy doesn't sharpen your view, it excites more vibrational modes, and the effective extent of the string spreads. The string's size therefore builds.
Wouldn't it be the difference between the wobbles of the string would still be lower than the Planck length? And you've just said that and ignored it as a measurement of below Planck length. I'm sorry, what? That's the most like it's right in front of you thing. And you're like, nope. We can't see smaller than that. Yep, nope. But we are. But it's there. Or it can be simulated that it is what is it is.
In a natural limit to resolution. What's remarkable is that string theory starts out as a quantum theory of vibrating strings, but when you zoom out and look at it from afar, the equations of Einstein's general theory of relativity naturally fall out. Gravity isn't added in by hand, it's already there, hidden in the theory itself. And it even contains its own string version of the uncertainty principle, which closely mirrors the generalized uncertainty principle we derived earlier. In both, the first term is the familiar Heisenberg relation, and the second grows with momentum. When they balance, delta X reaches a minimum. In string theory, that minimum is of order the string length, and in the GUP from earlier, it's of order the Planck length. Either way, nature refuses to let us probe beyond that fundamental scale. Loop quantum gravity takes a different route. Instead of introducing extended probes, it quantizes space-time itself. Its fundamental states are called spin networks, webs of nodes and links that represent quanta of space.
I mean, we know that there are fields, so I'm sorry, what?
With the links corresponding to discrete areas and the nodes to discrete volumes. In this picture, space is built from indivisible chunks, roughly the size of the Planck scale, and beneath that, the smooth fabric of spacetime gives way to a granular quantum geometry. Both string theory and loop quantum gravity are active programs of research with real successes, real challenges, and real open questions. And I'll take a deep dive.
I haven't heard any success from those. What? There's always like something missing.
Into both theories in the near future. But for now, I'll leave you with the words of Nima Akani Hamed, who says, every time we've encountered ideas in physics that cannot even in principle be observed, we have come to see such ideas as approximate notions.
I hope you
However,
read my
this
spectrum
instance is particularly disturbing
paper because
the notion that emerges as approximate
like
is
the
that of space-time itself. Thank you for listening, and until next time, goodbye. Goodbye.
Do Ford service technicians
Jeff, fuck idiot. So we begin.
Have you ever wondered whether we can keep zooming into nature forever? Each new tool we've built has taken us deeper into that unseen world. Early microscopes revealed tiny cells and wriggling microorganisms, invisible to the naked eye. Electron microscopes took us deeper still, showing individual atoms. But can we go further? Well, the answer is yes. The Large Hadron...
At some point, he talks about this straight line thing that resolved the width of whatever the hell, and it was like, oh, this is cool.
gigaton electron volts at hydrogen and deuterium, researchers observed that the electrons scattered from point-like constituents inside the proton. These constituent components are known as quarks. And these...
Yeah, you might end up being confused as to what exactly about something. But it's like, okay, that's a thing. Wait, that happened 1990? We've 35 years? Stuff about quarks.
Molecules has an associated wavelength given by exactly the same relation as for photons. Lambda equals h divided by p, where p is the momentum and h is Planck's constant. And so matter itself can act as a kind of wave. This means that we can use particles like electrons as probes to see small structures, applying the same logic that we used for light. The shorter the de Broglie wavelength, the finer the details that we can resolve. So let's consider an example. Suppose we want to be...
Again, the difference between wavelengths could be the thing that we use to resolve things. Because any amount that if it were to change any amount, we would be able to tell even the difference between the regular length and the length that results. So there would be that ability to like have even higher resolution stuff, but
are liberated from the surface and then accelerate them through a potential difference of 150 volts and channel them through a small hole. The emerging electron beam will then have a de Broglie wavelength of around 0.1 nanometers. And this is precisely what happened in 1927 when
Right.
Davison and Germer fired a beam of electrons towards a nickel crystal and observed a diffraction pattern, confirming de Broglie's matter wave hypothesis. Now,
okay.
it's interesting to compare the kinetic energy required by an electron to resolve atomic dimensions with the energy of a photon that has the same wavelength. For a photon with wavelength 10 to the minus 10 meters, the energy of the photon can be calculated using the photon energy equation, and we find a value of around 1.99 times 10 to the minus 15 joules, which corresponds to 12,400 electron volts, or 12.4 kiloelectron volts. Compare this with the kinetic energy of an electron with the same wavelength. Photons therefore carry nearly 100 times more energy than electrons need to achieve the same resolving power.
Okay, so the thing about that is that photons are naturally the wobbly thing, and electrons don't need, like they have certain size differences. So electrons, in contrast, are just linear little dots that we can shoot at stuff at faster and faster speeds to resolve smaller and smaller amounts of stuff. But still.
Matter can act as waves. For light, we found that if we want to resolve a feature of size delta x, we need photons whose wavelength lambda is roughly equal to that size, and this corresponds to an energy of roughly hc divided by delta x. For electrons, the logic is exactly the same. To resolve a region of size delta x, the electron's de Broglie wavelength must be comparable to that scale, and we saw that this requires momentum roughly equal to h divided by delta x. And once we know the momentum, we can work out the required kinetic energy, which is equal to the total relativistic energy minus the electron's rest mass energy. Now, here's an important point. If we write out the kinetic energy equation in full, then we see that inside the square root there is a term that depends on the electron's momentum and a term that depends on the electron's rest mass energy. Now, when the electron's momentum becomes very large, the product PC becomes much greater than mc squared.
Okay, my question to you, when I'm looking at this, I'm looking at the functions, and I'm always wrong about this, or I'm always not aware of how these functions operate. But if I were to assume you start with, I'm running out of power, whatever. You start with this, calculate it, you then add this and calculate it and then add it. You then square the result of these two, and then you remove for this. So it's not that it's like saying you're trying to consider when P becomes very large, PC becomes greater than MPC. Whatever.
In this case, the mc squared terms in the kinetic energy expression are negligible compared with the momentum term, and so can be neglected. And so we see that in this high momentum limit, the kinetic energy of the electron...
I just can't help but think that you have you realize, like, these different terms refer to relationships, and so if the first term inside the brackets is referring to something that is part of a square, which is the sum of it plus something else, imagine it's 1 plus 2. Then you end up with 3 times itself, which is 3 times 3 is 9. And if we consider MC to be 2, the total number is 7. And if you were to negate both of them, then you only end up with 1, the PC. But what he's trying to say is that if you increase the number of the PC, for example, if you say it's 4, if PC is equal to 4 and MC is equal to 1, the total is 5. You square that. 5 times 5 is 25. And then you remove 5, you end up with 20. Versus you starting with just PC, you end up with 4. Am I wrong about how that operates? I feel like I am, but it feels like that's not wrong. Oh, it's even more different because it's... Okay, wait. So you have the PC squared. Forget about if the numbers make sense as squares. Just think about one number plus another number, and then that number squared. But instead, it would, like, where does this second square term take place in regards to the entire equation? And it's not that you resolve this number and then you resolve this number. and you square, but then that total squared, it's that. This is stuff I haven't looked into, but when it comes to orders of magnitude like that and whatever else, if you're able to tell me that the square root of MC2, or the squaring of MC2, it can be, like, are we dealing with PC or PC2? Where does the other MC2 brackets 2, where does that extra 2 come from? Why is it ignored? I don't quite. The relationship doesn't quite make sense, and it like totally breaks down with the idea of these numbers are just equivalent because of the mass of scale. It's like I'm not a maths learned person. I can't explain how any of these equations work. I don't work with equations. I work with physics. So, ha 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 ha, fuck you. I work with, if you have, for example, let me show you what I translate this into being with that same old document. So we start off with, say, 2 squared, and then with the P, which is PC squared. And then you, on the other side of the equation, you have maybe 8 squared, which is MC squared, or the mass. We'll just call it mass. Or C squared. You end up with something that's more similar. It's just the 2/8 squared. And then all of that, well, 2 squared is 4. Reduce that, and then 16, so total of 20. And then that squared is 20 times 20, which is 400. And then that minus the initial 8 squared, which is 20, it only equals 380. And that's just not the same as saying the 2 squared, which was the PC. Like, I don't end up with the same numbers. I don't end up with the same, and stuff, all of that stuff. So when I do the math like that,
Electron will be roughly equal to PC, and we call this the ultra-relativistic regime.
so here's the thing. Why am I so bothered about this relationship? Doesn't matter and whatever else. It puts into question, and just in my mind alone, everyone else who understands it already knows all of this. Doesn't make any difference and doesn't mean anything, and no one cares. But just to me, trying to understand it, is that you have these terms that it only works at that scale, that you can just say cancel them out. But when you increase the scale, then those aren't at all the same expressions, you might as well replace them with the actual expressions or separate notation, because one is the number squared and one is the number flat. So 2 times 2 is 4, right? And so if the...
I'm done.
Oh, for fuck's sakes.
Now consider electrons moving very fast with high energies and record the de Broglie momentum wavelength equation. Then if we combine this with the kinetic energy equation, we obtain the exact same relation that we had for photons of light. So this is telling us that in the high energy limit, the electron's kinetic energy behaves just like the energy of a photon with the same wavelength. Or to put this another way, once the electron's kinetic energy far exceeds its rest mass energy, its energy scaling becomes the same as light. And so from this point on, since we'll be dealing with very high energies and very short distance scales, we will use the simple relation E is approximately equal to hc divided by delta x, safe in the knowledge that in this regime, we no longer need to distinguish between light and matter probes. Whether we use photons or ultra-relativistic electrons, the same rule applies. The higher the energy, the shorter the wavelength, and the smaller the scale that we can explore. So this now raises...
Yeah, and I don't know, we maybe have already explored everything that is about this video. Although we didn't, we clearly bypassed some of the little bits here and there. But yeah, just use different frequencies, you'll be fine. Use small burst to give yourself the least chance of black holeness. And yeah, just use multiple frequency transmission. You should, like, depending on how each wavelength of light works, you can even, again, you can compress it so that the only point that you have a tiny fraction of area that is concentrated and has focused light of any sort that could make a black hole is only a very small area. So you won't make a black hole, for example, anywhere other than where you're focusing the light. Up to a certain point, there's going to be a certain area where it's like, it's a sphere of potential black hole area that can be made by the focusing of the light, depending on the way you aim the light. But again, by simply working with multiple frequencies of light, the differences between those frequencies can be extremely tiny. And so, and again, people have talked about femtoseconds. I don't know how fast that is. Let's take a look, shall we? Okay, so blah 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 blah. You freaking idiot. I'm gonna hit you, bitch, get it right. When I try to say fucking whatever I said. You're... What the fuck is the definition? Femto. Femtosecond, yeah, 1 to the 15th. we're already at this resolution. So you want to go deeper, you got to go multi-frequency. Yeah, 1/4,000,000th. And this is this again, when you have electrons orbiting stuff, femtoseconds are how you visualize that. If you want to go into smaller stuff, and again you got to go to another 10 to the 10th smaller, or 10 to the 20th smaller, you're going to need multi-frequency, and then you can easily, oh, it's a misspelling of freaking femto versus freaking femp, whatever. Used to describe events of molecular scale and chemical reactions. Comical reactions. They're funny. So yeah, ultra fast processes in fields in chemistry, material science, biology. It's cool that we have this already, but we don't use frequency transfer. That, like, the moment you have alternating frequencies, you'll have a much better resolution.